He told investigators that by mutilating her body, he was doing her a favor so that way she could decompose faster. Hi guys, I'm Lex Hendricks. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, we'll be talking about Arthur Shawcross, aka the Genesee River Killer. He's a serial killer that killed many women in his local area, Rochester, New York. His crimes included cannibalism, mutilation, and more. So let's just get into the video. Arthur Shawcross was born June 6, 1945 in Kittery, Maine. He was the eldest of four, born to Elizabeth and Arthur Shawcross. While he was still young, they moved to Watertown in New York State. While several tests show Arthur's intelligence was subnormal or borderline mentally challenged, he received A's and B's his first 2 years of grade school. But when he was later tested, the results of his IQ was 86, which is below average intelligence. Arthur stated that he was a frequent bedwetter throughout his childhood. Arthur later claimed that his mom performed sexual acts on him as a child, which included the insertion of foreign objects, and he also claimed that his aunt performed oral sex on him when he was 9 years old, and he also claimed that he had sexual relations with his sister when they were younger, and admitted to his first homosexual encounter at 11, followed by experience with bestiality. In contrast to his claims, his family says that he had a normal childhood, and all of the claims that he stated were false, and they were a product of his imagination. There is no evidence to state that he was telling the truth, but as time went on, when he was interviewed by different professionals, his stories would change at will. He also came under suspicion for a series of juvenile arson attacks and burglaries, and after failing to pass the 9th grade, he dropped out of school. The next few years of his life were filled with violence and jail sentences. He received his first probationary period December 1963 at the age of 18. Almost a year later, he married his first wife, Sarah, September 1964. And by the following year, they had a son born in October 1965. However, another probationary charge for unlawful entry and the fact that he was abusive towards his wife was the last straw for Sarah, and he was divorced soon after. In April 1967, he gave up all rights to his 18-month-old son and got drafted into the Army at the age of 21, followed by his second marriage. He served a tour in Vietnam in October 1967 and claimed that he had 39 combat kills and killed 2 Vietnamese girls and ate them. When later investigated, his statement was found to be fabricated, and authorities claimed that he had killed no one during his tour in Vietnam. After his release from the Army, he and his second wife, Linda Neary, returned to Clayton, New York. She divorced him shortly after, citing his tendency to be abusive and a pyromaniac. In 1968, he landed in trouble yet again when he was caught and convicted for an arson attack. He served almost 2 full years of a 5-year sentence. He returned to Watertown, New York. By the following April, yet again, he was married for the 3rd time to Penny Charbonneau, who was pregnant with his child. Okay, so now he's in Watertown, New York, and this is where the first murder happens, the first victim. First victim is a 10-year-old child by the name of Jack Blake Owen, which was his next door neighbor. He was a typical fun-loving 5th grader. He was the 7th of 9 children and even once saved his sister from drowning in the Black River. Shawcross had taken fishing just a few days before he disappeared, but when authorities questioned him, he claimed to have never seen the little boy. Months later, Jack's body was found in the woods. He had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death, and get this, his genitals were bitten off. Karen Hill was the second victim. She was only 8 years old, visiting Watertown with her mother for Labor Day weekend. Her body was found under the bridge. She was raped, murdered, and mutilated. Police have found mud, leaves, and other debris shoved down her throat and inside her clothing. Neighbors told police that they had seen Karen in the vicinity of the bridge just before her disappearance, and they saw Shawcross with her. And because of his minor run-ins with the other local children, they were suspicious about it, because there was one instance where he punched his 13-year-old child because they threw a snowball at his window. Shawcross was arrested October 3rd, 1972, and while he was under investigation, he admitted to killing both children. He was only charged with Karen Hill's death because they stated that there was lack of evidence for Jack's death. He ended up receiving a 25-year jail sentence in the Greenhaven prison, but only served 15. The parole board was uncomfortable with releasing him, and the psychologist's reports were not positive. So I don't understand why they would release him if they weren't comfortable. I guess if he's on parole, he had good behavior either way it goes, so they let him go. His parole officer, Robert, stated, and I quote, "At the risk of sounding melodramatic, I consider this man to be possibly the most dangerous individual to be released to this community in years." He was paroled to Rochester, New York in 1987. Everywhere that he went, basically the police or the town would find out what he did, and they would run him out of that town. So it got to the point where the parole board sealed his records to where the police or anyone in town, if they looked up his name, it wouldn't show up. His records were sealed, so no one knew of the murders that he had committed, so that way he can live peacefully, I guess. He had a pen pal in prison. Her name was Rose, that he was talking to while he was in prison, and when he got out, he was paroled to Rochester, New York, but eventually moved in with her in, I don't know how to say it, Delhi, New York? Not sure. He moved in with her in her apartment. And soon after, that's when they moved back to Rochester, New York. He began cheating on her with the local sex workers. He became a well-known customer to the women of Lyell Avenue. That following year, March 1988, women began disappearing off of the streets. 27-year-old Dorothy Blackburn was one of his first victims, and she was a sex worker from Lyell Avenue. She was found strangled in a nearby riverbed and with deep bite marks around her genitals. Arthur paid her $30 for oral sex and claimed that the reason that he killed her is because she bit his penis and called him a homophobic slur. Anna Stephen was also 27 years old. She was last seen alive in July of 1989. Her bones were found on the banks of the Genesee River. She was discovered by a man collecting bottles. Shawcross claimed that she offered him sex for $20 and he could not get an erection, so she made fun of him. He got angry and punched her to the ground, and she tried to get away by crawling into the water. He went after her and held her by the throat underwater until she drowned. He later told the authorities that he couldn't be bothered with getting rid of her body, so he just let it float downstream. And investigators had to reconstruct her facial features. The only way that they knew that it was Anna Stephen is because they let her father see the facial recreation and identified her as his daughter. On October 21st, 1989, the body of a 59-year-old homeless woman by the name of Dorothy Keeler was discovered, followed by Patricia Ives in the same area. Both women were asphyxiated, but Dorothy's neck was broken, which could mean that he used more force when dealing with Dorothy. After the investigators found the body of the fourth victim, which was Patricia Ives, then they suspected that there may be a serial killer on the loose in Rochester. All four of the women that went missing were murdered within 7 months of each other, and 3 of the women were murdered within a few weeks of each other. 3 of them were sex workers from Lyell Avenue and had bite marks and were strangled. The press started to show interest in the cases once they found out that they may be linked, and so they gave them the nickname the Genesee River Killer, or you may have heard of the Rochester Strangler or the River Monster, just based on the location that each of the bodies were found. Investigators began looking for a serial killer mainly because of the similarities in the cases and how close together they were getting, like the times between each murder was getting shorter and shorter. And they also believe that whoever this killer was may have had criminal or military experience. They advise the sex workers of Lyle Avenue to exercise with caution. If they're gonna still do their sex work, make sure it's with someone that they know, and they begin to seek out as much information as they could. And they decided to look through the criminal records of the local people in the area. And remember, I said his case was sealed mainly because he kept getting harassed in every place that he went, every time he moved somewhere. So the parole board sealed his records without the police even knowing. So the police can't even see anything. No one can see anything. The only people that know is the parole board, the last town, and Arthur, basically. Even though police were doing more investigating and questioning people, more and more women still went missing. On October 23rd, 30-year-old June Stott was reported missing by her boyfriend. And she was mentally ill, and she would occasionally vanish without telling anyone. And police didn't connect her missing persons case with any of the missing persons cases or the murder cases that they had just seen in the past, because she wasn't abusing any drugs and she wasn't a sex worker. So they felt like they had kind of like a pattern figured out with this serial killer that was going around, and so they didn't really look too much into it as they should have. On November 5th, 1989, Marie Welch was a 22-year-old sex worker from Lyle Avenue, went missing as well. 22-year-old Frances Brown, also known as Franny, was last seen on November the 11th, leaving Lyle Avenue with a client by the name of Mike or Mitch, as some of the sex workers stated. That was the last time that anyone saw Franny. 3 days later, her body was found nude. She had been beaten, strangled to death, and dumped into the Genesee River Gorge. 30-year-old Kimberly Logan, another Lyle Avenue sex worker, was found November 15, 1989. She had been brutally kicked and beaten, and dirt and leaves were crammed down her throat, just like he did 8-year-old Karen Hill. Pattern, see that? And that one piece of evidence could have linked police to Arthur Shawcross had they known he was in Rochester. Mind you, after those 2 deaths, case sealed, they don't know anything about him. They don't even know he's there. At the beginning of November, Joanne Van Nostrand told investigators about a client named Mitch who would pay her to play dead, and he would try to strangle her, which she didn't allow him to do. And there were a lot of sex workers who had clients who had these different fetishes and these certain things that they wanted to do, but she stated that Mitch really creeped her out. This was the second time a physical description of this person, Mitch, had been brought up, and come to find out he had a violent reputation, and he was a regular client. 1 month after being reported missing by her boyfriend, June Stott was discovered by a man who was walking his dog. She had been strangled to death, her body was anally mutilated, and she was cut from her throat to her crotch. She was one of the missing persons that investigators didn't think was part of the cases where the serial killer was wreaking havoc on Rochester. But it confused investigators because she wasn't a drug abuser or a sex worker, and her body was found in a different area from the other bodies, which led them to believe that there were 2 killers in Rochester, and that's when they decided to get the FBI involved. FBI agents created a criminal profile which stated that he may be a Caucasian male in his 30s, and he is possibly a regular or well-known in the area, and also probably has a criminal record. They also noted that based on his lack of semen, that he may be sexually dysfunctional and found gratification after his victims were dead, and they also seem to believe that he may be coming back to the bodies of the victims after he had murdered them and mutilate them whenever possible. The body of 29-year-old Elizabeth Liz Gibson was found in another county, but she was also a sex worker from Lyle Avenue. She was last seen by Joanne Van Nostrand, who gave them the tip on the guy, the regular client Mitch, and also gave them a description of Mitch's car. The FBI agent strongly suggested that when he kills his next victim, to wait and watch to see if he would return to the body, because they decided that they saw a pattern in the time frame in which he was killing the victim, so they assumed that there would be a next one. And now we fast forward to December, and you may think that it's the holiday season, the business of it all, the cold weather would slow down a cold-blooded serial killer. It unfortunately does not. 3 women disappeared back to back. 32-year-old Darlene Trippy was known for pairing up with Joanne Van Nostrand, but she too disappeared December 15th off of Lyle Avenue. 34-year-old June Cicero was known for her good instincts and staying alert, but she also disappeared December 17th off of Lyle Avenue. And as if to toast to the new year, the serial killer struck again on December 28th, grabbing 20-year-old Felicia Stevens off of the street, and she was never to be seen again. In an effort to find the missing women, the police organized an air search over the Genesee River Gorge. Road patrols were sent out on New Year's Eve, and they discovered a pair of black jeans that belonged to Felicia Stevens. Her boots were found in another area, and on January 2nd, they organized another ground and air search before they called it off because of the bad weather. The air team spotted what appeared to be the body of a half-naked woman lying face down near Salmon Creek, and as they looked closer, they saw a man standing on the bridge above the body. He appeared to be urinating, but once he spotted the air crew, he decided to flee in his van. They notified the ground team, and they went in pursuit of this man. The body that they found was June Cicero. There were bite marks covering up what was left of her genitals, which had been cut out. The man was apprehended at a nearby nursing home, which they found out it was Arthur Shawcross. The investigators asked him for his ID, and he said he did not have one because he was convicted of manslaughter. Shawcross and his girlfriend Clara Neal were brought in for questioning, and as time went on, he still would not say anything about the Rochester murders, but he offered up information about his childhood, his manslaughter charges, and his experience in Vietnam. There's no real answer as to why he seemed to elaborate on his childhood stories. He could have just stayed silent, but it seemed like he wanted to shock interrogators with the details of his childhood, and he wanted to shock them with the details of his previous murders, I guess because he knew that they couldn't do anything about those previous murders, so he kind of just wanted to go deep into detail about them. When discussing the murders about the children in 1972, he told investigators that Jack kept bothering him, so he hit him and killed him by mistake, and once he realized that he was dead, he decided to eat his genitals. He also admitted that he anally raped Karen Hill before strangling her to death. After hours of him telling his old confessions, police had no evidence and they had to let him go, but not before they got a picture of him. That same picture that they took of Arthur Shawcross, they showed to Joanne and other sex workers, and they identified him as the regular customer by the name of Mike or Mitch. That's when they brought him in for a second questioning. He still did not give out any information. Once police told him that they would bring in his girlfriend Clara Neal and include her in the murder cases, that's when he began to waver. He first admitted that he had something to do with the murders and his girlfriend Clara had nothing to do with it, and that's when the details began to come out. He began to talk even more. They gave him a list of 16 women that had been murdered, and he denied 5 of them, but the other ones he did admit to murdering those women. With each woman, he said that they deserved what they got. So one of them stole his wallet, the other one wouldn't be quiet, the other one made fun of him, and one tried to bite his penis off. And he also blamed the women for them reminding him of his abusive, domineering mother, and he would just, spaz hit him and would not stop. When it came to discuss the murder of the victim, June Stott, he became sad almost. Come to find out, she was a guest in his home, and he told He told investigators that by mutilating her body, he was doing her a favor so that way she could decompose faster. And he would answer questions differently depending on who was doing the interviewing. If there was a female interviewer, he would talk a lot about the cannibalism of eating their genitals and organs and things of that nature. And if it was a male interviewer, he would talk more about his kills in Vietnam, his tours in Vietnam. And if he sensed sympathy from either interviewer, he would bring up more details about his abusive childhood with his mother and aunt. And Shawcross was so transparent that many of the interviewers, doctors, and police officers that talked to him didn't really believe what he would say about the victims or his childhood. Shawcross ended up pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, and his lawyer tried to bring up that he has a multiple personality disorder, which could have stemmed from his abusive childhood, and PTSD that could have came from his tour in Vietnam, which is why he brought up him killing those 39 combat soldiers and those 2 Vietnamese women. And the big problem with this offense was that no one would back him up on his stories. His family said that there was no abuse going on, none of the molestation happened. The army stated that he was never stationed near a jungle, he was never in combat, he never burned down huts, he never killed any women, none of those things. And the psychiatrist also stated that he would change his story so much that none of what he would say is believable because it would constantly change. It would be one thing and then next time they interview him is something else. Shawcross was discovered to have an extra Y chromosome, which some people believe that it makes people more violent, but there is no scientific evidence to back that up. The cyst on his right temporal lobe was said to cause him to have behavioral seizures, where he would display animalistic behavior, for example, eating his victims' body parts. In the end, it all came down to the jury. After deliberating for 30 minutes, they were not fooled. He was ruled sane and guilty. He received a 250-year sentence plus a life sentence after admitting to the death of Elizabeth Liz Gibson in Wayne County, whose mother stated, and I quote, "He should suffer like my baby did." On November 10, 2008, Arthur Shawcross died of cardiac arrest after being transferred from Sullivan Correctional Facility to an Albany, New York hospital. And that is the end of that. Oh my gosh. When I read about this case, it truly stressed me out a little bit, because it was like victim after victim after victim, and the fact that the parole board didn't let anybody know what was going on is like, okay, I understand that these people ran him out of the town or whatever, but it's like, y'all gotta have some type of mutual understanding, because that's not okay to just not let people know anything. And that is the reason why so much stuff happened, because if they would have known about the cases that were going on already in his past, they would have been able to catch him sooner. Not saying that everybody would have survived or whatever, but they would have been able to put an end to it way sooner than they did. I don't know, man. Just let me know what you all think in the comments below. If I missed any information, just put it in the comments. Let me know how I did. This is my first video. Let me know if you want to see more like this. I don't plan on just limiting myself to just serial killer videos. I want to do more of like the supernatural, anything. If you have any suggestions about stuff that people don't really talk about, serial killers, or just top 10 strangest things, anything like that, that's what I'm going for. I'm not just gonna limit myself to this one thing. But that's all for today. I'll see you all in the next video.